My mother held a chair. Dali had to jump, and the three people had to throw the cats. But there was always some problem.
Philippe Halsman, one of the 20th century's most prolific, innovative portrait photographers, and collaborator with one Salvador Dali. Their 1948 photograph, Dali Atomicus, is one of Halsman's most surreal and famous images. But how did he and Dali achieve this photographic feat? Get comfy. This is the story behind the image. This is Time Frame.
Howard, that's my favorite picture. Because you asked me.
But this video is about Dali Atomicus.
Born in Latvia in 1906, Philippe moved to Paris in 1930, where he rekindled a love for one of his favourite pastimes.
His girlfriend was taking a photography course, and he found that he was more interested in the assignments than she was. He decided to dedicate his life to photography. And by the end of the 1930s, he was considered one of the best portrait photographers in Paris.
Yeah, I was going to say he was self-taught.
When the Nazis invaded France, he became a refugee, eventually escaping over the Atlantic to New York City, thanks to a family friend, someone who would later become the subject of one of his photographs.
Through the intervention of Albert Einstein, who had his name added to an emergency visa list for artists and writers, he joined the rest of his family here. Irene was 1 year old on the boat, and he came to New York with, a suitcase and 12 prints, and, had to start from scratch.
And the camera, I think he had the camera with him.
What started as a suitcase became a legendary portfolio of work that brought him face to face with many of the world's most famous personalities. And that camera that Irene mentioned, a twin-lens reflex, he designed himself. In 1970, Philippe took his 100th cover photo for Life magazine. But back in 1940s New York City, he was to have a career-changing encounter involving poultry and ballet dancers.
So one day he sees Dali is in town for his ballet russe costumes, and because Philippe was just in Paris in the 1930s, of course he recognizes Dali's name. So he says, okay, I'm gonna take this assignment. And he meets Dali, and Dali had made these very creative costumes of chickens, and he does this whole shoot on the rooftop with the dancers in these ballet costumes. Philippe is bringing this kind of surrealistic spirit as a refugee from Paris, and all of a sudden this picture is run as Life's photo of the week.
This was the genesis of Philippe's connection with Life magazine and his 37-year collaboration with Dali.
He had Philippe as a favorite photographer. They were not like Braque and Picasso, who were collaborating and doing cubism. They were very different. Philippe never wanted to pick up a paintbrush, and Dali never wanted to pick up a camera and photograph. They weren't adversaries. They were collaborators.
The blood-red dawn of the atomic age inspired Dali's next art movement, which he called nuclear mysticism.
Dali was always very interested in science. He saw that the atom is made up of the proton, the neutron, the electron, and they're all floating.
Dali's painting Later Atomica suspends reality, suspends a nude portrait of his wife Gala, and virtually every single object in the image. Even the water levitates above the sand.
Philippe was at the opening and he saw this painting and he said, wow, this is an incredible painting. Let's do a photograph. Instead of Later Atomica, we'll do Dali Atomicus. Everything will be in levitation, and you'll come to my studio and we'll have the painting suspended and you'll be jumping in the air. What do you think? And Dali said, that's a great idea. They're trying to decide, what else should be the content of the picture.
You don't want the duck story?
Yes, the duck story, but
you want it
don't,
or me?
You can tell it, but don't downplay it, just tell it straight.
Dali says, I have an idea. Why don't we get a duck and put some dynamite up his derriere and explode it, and you take the picture. And my father said, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. You're in America now. You don't want to be put in jail for, animal cruelty. So my father had this idea, how about cats? And Dali said, not just one, let's have 3 cats. Each store had a mouser, a cat who would be in the basement catching mice. So my aunt went to the proprietor of every store and said, my brother is a photographer, and can we borrow your cat? We'll return him.
Initially, Dali said, let's throw the cats into milk. Philippe said, Dali, the war just ended. There's starving children in Europe.
So they settled on water. For the session in Philippe's New York studio, assistants were hired for some very unusual duties.
1 for each cat, 3 cats, and 1 assistant through the water. But my father also hung up the Dali Atomicus painting, as you see here.
Suspended from the balcony.
Suspended by the balcony.
And there's a floating stool, which we still have. The initial takes, it's usually 1 cat in the air, but the more the merrier. At a certain point, they just started throwing all of them.
Turn. My mother held a chair. Dali had to jump, and the 3 people had to throw the cats. But there was always some problem. The cats were late. Dali jumped late one time. And my father would run upstairs where we had a dark room, and he would print it, come downstairs and say, no, not good. So we have to do it again. My job, and I was 8 or 9 years old at the time, was to catch the cats and dry them off because they got wet by the water sometimes. It took 26 times of throwing the cats and throwing the water and mopping it up. It took, I think, 5 hours. People always ask me, how could you throw cats 26 times? And Mother said, I fed them Portuguese sardines at the end, and they were all very happy.
They did another 2 attempts, but none matched shot 26. That magical combination of the perseverance, the ingenuity, the skill, and of course the sardines, has led some to assume it's all composited together.
The only thing that was added later was the painting. Originally it was a blank easel, but Dali had paranoid critical method. He was always looking at reality and trying to find some kind of hidden image in it. So here, if you look at the actual painting, he takes the shape of this cat tail and its lower foot and turns that into the nose and that empty space into an eye, and then he takes the back leg of this cat and he turns that into like a frowning face, and he composites them together. So it's kind of like this meta image. Again, this became like Life's Picture of the Week. And this is one of those, moment where it all came together perfectly.
It could never be replicated. I mean, people tried it with Legos. They tried it with all kinds of things. They can't replicate this in one shot.
In Philippe's journals, he says, Dali is the most fascinating person to me. Like, we're completely opposite in so many ways, but we both get each other. And I think when you're an artist and you find that type of collaborative partnership, that's the most ideal thing, because you can combine your 2 creative geniuses together and create something the world's never seen before.